Welcome to Keith Knight Don't Tread on Anyone in the Libertarian Institute. Today I'm joined by Dr. Erec Smith. He is co-founder and co-editor of FBT, Free Black Thought. He is a writing fellow for Heterodox Academy, associate professor of rhetoric, York College of Pennsylvania, and author of the 2020 book, A Critique of Anti-Racism in Rhetoric and Composition, The Semblance of Empowerment. Dr. Smith, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
What is rhetoric? Why is it important?
Rhetoric is the study of effective communication, or the study of persuasion. Aristotle's definition seems to be the traditional one. And his definition is that rhetoric is the ability to discern in any given situation the available means of persuasion. So what does availability mean? That means you have to gauge your audience, the situation, and realize what statements will, get you to your goal and what statements will not, based on that particular situation. It's called kairos, which is a confluence of time, place, audience, subject matter, who you are in that context, and things like that. So that is the quickest explanation of rhetoric I can give you. Why is it important, though? Well, in a civil society in which people get together and create associations and institutes as they see fit as individuals, they have to have a good reason for doing so and a good reason for getting other people to join in. What's more, if you're going to have a pluralistic civil society, then you, by nature, will have various viewpoints. And, if you have various viewpoints, you would do well to have rhetorical skill to sell yours, right, in the marketplace of ideas, or as Jonathan Rauch might say, the marketplace of persuasion. So rhetoric is imperative to a pluralistic and civil democratic society. Otherwise, we devolve into violence.
What is the general mission of the Heterodox Academy?
It's to preserve an appreciation for viewpoint diversity. And tolerating viewpoints that aren't yours. You don't have to like those viewpoints, but you can, address those viewpoints with your free speech and your diversity of viewpoints, right? You're not shutting people up. You're not coercing them to say certain things they don't want to say, and you're not silencing them. You're talking to them. So there is the tacit meaning or mission of Heterodox Academy is, well, use your words, right? It's not just viewpoint diversity. Everybody is allowed to have a viewpoint. It's also use your words to deal with the viewpoints you do not want to deal with. So, I think rhetoric is a foundational aspect of that organization as well.
Without the state regulating what people can and can't say, this would allow extremists to rise up and coerce the population in ways that are far worse than just silencing some free speech. How do you respond to that mindset?
Well, they can speak and so can you, right? And the key is to be, this is why rhetoric is important. Aristotle said that if you have the truth and you lose the debate to somebody who is lying, that's your fault. You should have had better skills, especially if you were telling the truth. So when it comes to things like that or possibilities like that, that actually feeds my justifications for why everybody should be as rhetorically savvy as possible, right? To address those things and to be convincing when you address those things. Because it is, I like the metaphor of a marketplace of ideas. You're basically selling your idea to consumers, and the better you do that, the better they will take your idea. So my answer to that is be good at rhetoric.
When it comes to some of the people who you would know maybe in Hollywood or politics who have the best rhetoric skills, who comes to mind?
Wait, in Hollywood and politics have the best rhetoric?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of people that the average American would know. So this could be any sort of communicator, professors, politicians, people in Hollywood, people in the media. Who comes to mind when you think of really people who have a lot of skills when it comes to rhetoric?
Oh, wow. You're going to get me in trouble here because no one particularly comes to mind.
How about Bill Clinton?
I was going to say Bill Clinton. I really
Uh,
was. I swear to God, I was going to say Bill Clinton, but then I was
because
like,
I was watching him in a debate with Bush Sr. the other day. You can find it
yeah,
on YouTube, and I go, I am the biggest non-Clinton fan, but this
uh-huh.
guy knows how to communicate, and I
I
have a
was,
lot to learn from this prick.
yeah, he was smooth.
Yes.
He was smooth. And the reason why I didn't mention it because it was the 90s and I thought maybe you're looking for somebody more contemporary. But yeah, that did come to mind. I think Obama had a bit of savvy too.
Mhm.
But I mean, I can't really, there's nobody out there. Well, no, that's not fair. I'll say this. What they're doing, if they're being good rhetoricians, is gauging their audience and speaking accordingly. So, if you're speaking to America at large, you may really say, well, you know what, I'm going to target a particular audience, my base, or something like that. And I mean, I remember when people used to complain about Trump and his speeches and things like that, and people would say he's such a terrible, speech maker. He's so bad at that, and I would be like, you're not his audience.
Mm.
He's talking to
Interesting.
somebody
Yeah.
else who loves that speech, who loves his rhetoric. We're not the there's a term for these things in rhetorical theory. We're not his second persona. We're not his direct audience. We're the third persona. We're the people who are there, but he's not talking to. Right.
So
So
if I'm sorry to
yeah,
interrupt.
no, I'm done.
So if I'm trying to persuade an audience, I have to know who my audience is first. What else do I have to know before going into a social situation if my goal is to persuade?
Well, that's where Kairos comes into play, right? So you know your audience, and by knowing your audience, you know their values, attitudes, and beliefs to the best of your ability. You know their interest. You know the exigence or urgent problem that they may have, and you're going to speak accordingly. But you should probably also know who else is there, right? You're going to speak differently if somebody who has your same ethos but has the opposite opinion is there, right? Who may challenge you in those situations. You may say things differently than you would if you think that person's not going to be there, right? You're going to have more preparation for the counter arguments and things like that. There may be people in the audience who are that third persona, right? Who you're not directly speaking to. How might they influence the dynamics of the situation? So you do well to understand the timing, even, when is this happening? What happened before the meeting? What's going to happen after the meeting? How is that shaping how the audience may receive me? So what you're doing is, to the best of your ability, right, understanding the importance of the time of day, the time of month or year, where it's being held, it's right down to the physicality of the environment. How big is this room? How small is it? That may affect how you not just enunciate, but how you interact with the audience. Maybe you stand on the stage the whole time. Maybe you walk around because it is that small. All these things come into play, and if you can do that stuff before the speech, you'll be better able to persuade, ideally.
The site is freeblackthought.com. Link will be in the description below. I'm going to give you a sentence from a gentleman who I won't name because I don't want to bias you. You please rhetorically analyze the logic and rhetoric of this sentence. A racist is one who is supporting a racist policy through their actions or inaction by expressing a racist idea.
Okay. That sounds like somebody familiar. And that statement by itself, well, is insanely redundant, right? You don't, it's like using the word you're trying to define in the definition, right? You don't do that. To be fair, though, he does in other places in that book. We're talking about Kendi. Yeah. He does in other places in that book explain things in a way that makes that statement not as ridiculous. Right. So he does go into what he means by racist and racist ideas and things like that. So that's not as absurd of a statement as it would be otherwise. That being said, I don't agree with it, you know, because the premise of that entire book and the chapter in which he says that is that, any kind of disparity between the races is from racism, right? A racist policy or something like that. That's not the whole story. There may be something to that, but that's not everything. Everything's not to it, right? There may be other things going on.
What is Black cultural essentialism?
That is believing that all Black people think the same, right? Not just think the same, but react to things the same, right? They love the same, they feel the same, they have the same desires and things like that, because they've had the same experiences, right? But that's not true. Hence the organization Free Black Thought, which works to tell people that's not true and show people that's not true, by highlighting a lot of Black thinkers, artists, what have you, who aren't really known in mainstream media, because they don't fit in with the essentialized idea of what it means to be Black. We also have a journal of Free Black Thought, and we publish those similar voices, and voices who may not be Black, but are all about viewpoint diversity and recognizing that there is diversity within Black America. So that's how I feel about it.
So I'm going to give you what a progressive would say is a Black essentialist viewpoint. Please give me a possible alternative that you have heard another Black person take. It's important that we raise the minimum wage because people of color disproportionately have lower incomes as a cause of result of their historical mistreatment. Therefore, we need to do things like raise the minimum wage and increase the amount of welfare that the state distributes. What, if anything, is wrong with that?
Wow, that's a big question, my friend. Well, there have been, because of America's history, we got off to a slow start, or a late start, if you will. So there is that, but there's also the fact that minimum wage was created, to do the opposite of help Black people, right? Black people were lowballing, everybody, I'll do that for a lower price, right? So they made the minimum wage a certain level so that people wouldn't see the incentive of going to the Black people who at the time could not afford the best training, right? For whatever you're doing, plumbing, carpentry, or construction, what have you, right? They couldn't afford the best training, but the white people could. So if I have to pay $7 anyway, I might as well get the guy who went to the best, institution to learn these things. Minimum wage was created for anti-Black purposes. Now I'm not a big fan of saying, well, this happened in 1920, so it's still happening now. I hate that. I hate when people do that. So I don't want to say that because, the Bacon Act, which is what I believe it was called, happened to stifle Black upward mobility. Then it's doing so now. But what I'm trying to say is that the minimum wage being hiked up isn't everything, right? Because now, you could plausibly have less jobs because the minimum wage is higher. So people are hiring different people or less people, right? So one person's doing more jobs than he would have in the first place because his employer, can't pay more people, right? So, you could be, the unemployment could rise because of raising the minimum wage. So it's not as easy as if we raise this, Black people will make more money. It's not that cut and dry.
And this is why I think the topic of Black essentialism or woman essentialism or men essentialism is so important, because it's so frequently used to swindle people. It's like, look, I'm not doing this, because I like the money and fame of being a popular politician. I'm doing it on behalf of all these people. And
Yeah.
so now I basically have no constraint. I'm doing this for the greater good. So
Right.
now I don't care what the consequences are going to be, because I have this great ideal in mind. And then school choice was the other one, where it's like all the progressives who say they are very dedicated to increasing the well-being of Blacks, they are so anti-school choice, while the average Black person is very pro-school choice. That one is just so predictable.
Well, can we talk about that for a second?
Please.
Because I have some questions I like to think I'm as informed as I possibly can be, but I'm not. I'm only one person, and I'm trying to figure out why progressives would be against school choice. I'm trying to figure out what the reasoning behind that is. I have yet to hear a good one. I have yet to hear a convincing argument to be anti-school choice. So I guess I'm interviewing you now. What is the problem progressives have with it?
The primary arguments would come from SOS, Save Our Schools. This is the
Mhm.
progressive organization who is anti-school choice. What they say is by allowing school choice is
Mhm.
we need to put it in quotes because it's really not a choice. People want to go to a school that's closer to them. By allowing for choice, all you're really doing is allowing the rich people to fund their own schools while taking money away from schools that have mostly blacks, mostly Hispanics, and mostly people at lower incomes. So by allowing for choice, you decrease the probability of poor people getting their foot in the door intellectually, economically. It also allows you to ignore them because you have the choice to go wherever you want, and you end up ignoring people. Whereas if you are coercing them into going to this school with
Mhm.
truancy laws and property taxes, but by forcing them to do so, they now have an incentive to work to make that school better. That was the argument that the gentleman put forth in the show Blackish. Yeah, it was a whole episode dedicated to this white idiot. Wants school choice. Doesn't he know that he has to be in this school because then he has an incentive to make this school better? That is my steel man of the progressive argument.
Okay. All right.
Um, yeah, that's very common. It's the textbook imperialist mindset. I
Yeah.
coerce people for their own good, and if it were really for their own good, you could persuade them to do it. You
Okay. Got it.
said you said I critique academic anti-racism not because I'm against anti-racism, but because some of its implementations disempower and infantilize marginalized people. What does that mean?
Well, how much time do you have? I mean, I literally wrote a whole book answering that question, but I'll try my best to summarize it. Um, when I say I'm not against anti-racism, I mean that in the original etymological meaning of that term. I'm against racism. But we all know that anti-racism in this day and age means something a little different, something more akin to what's called critical social justice, right? And all the tenets that go with that, which I believe are disempowering for several reasons. Um, a, it assumes that people of color have no agency whatsoever. That they are perpetual victims. They can't succeed. They won't succeed in this system. So the system has to go. It also essentializes, as we just talked about. All Black students are the same. They have the same problems and things like that. They're marked before they even walk into the door of the classroom, right? So there's that. It ignores rhetoric for my field in particular. I think it ignores the whole point of Kairos, what we talked about earlier, audience consideration and things like that, because it's all about the lived experience of the student or the professor of color, and asking questions, asking for elaboration, pointing out where their story doesn't seem to make sense. That's considered a personal attack, which brings me to the fact that language is considered violence now, right? So there's that as well. What all of this does is disempower students or people of color, because it's learned helplessness, right? And you're infantilizing them by thinking that they can't figure it out themselves. They're going to crawl into the fetal position and weep, at the sight of a white person about to ask them a question, right? And things like that. So that's how it infantilizes and disempowers.
Dr. Wilfred Riley was on my show, and he said there are three ways you could look at differences between groups: critical theory, disparities are the result of discrimination; biology, the races evolved in different climates; and culturalism, people within those different demographics have embraced different cultural ideas. Which of those three do you think is most accurate to explain disparities between Asians, blacks, Mexicans, whites, whoever?
Mostly the third one, the culture one, because each culture has what I call a discourse, capital D as opposed to lowercase d. James G is a sociolinguistic professor who capitalized the D to distinguish it from just regular conversation or things like that. A discourse is a set of values, attitudes, and beliefs, right? As well as expectations for how you should look, dress, sound, all these different things. That is discourse, and certain values, attitudes, and beliefs are more conducive to success in a society like ours than others, right? So I would, if I had only those three choices, I would pick the culturalist choice. Now, that doesn't mean everything's perfect. That doesn't mean there are policies that there aren't policies that could be reformed, right? I'm not saying that, but I'm also saying that culture is a big part of it, and too many people don't want to mention that. They don't want to talk about it.
Can you give me an example of cultural ideas that either whites or blacks or Mexicans may have that holds them back systematically?
We see a lot of people saying that this group studies more than this group, right? Asians study more, because they value education and what it can get to you. And then white people value it too, but not as much. And black people are like, yeah, education is important, but it's not the most important thing, you know. Yeah, I mean, in my household, my parents cared about the grades we got and things like that, but not like my other peers, right? And I thought it was a good thing, and to an extent, I still do, because no matter what grade I got, they loved me, right? They're very open, right? And they were lenient enough to allow me to discover my own path and things like that. So I'm happy about that, but that also reflects, in my family anyway. I'm not speaking for every black family or every black person or anything like that. Reading wasn't as emphasized, perhaps as it was in other households. That didn't stop me. I mean, I love reading anyway, so I did it, but I didn't do it because my parents were pushing it. I did it because I wanted to read, right? So I mean, I guess that is kind of a thing, from what I'm seeing with surveys and things like that anyway. Now, I'm not a social scientist. I don't have the stats in front of me or anything like that. But from what I see, right, that seems to be the trend, and I think that may be a cultural thing.
So I want to give you what could be an alternative thesis that someone might say when trying to critique social justice activism. Walk me through. I want to start really elementary. How would you respond to the idea that men are 50% of the population, yet 95% of those in prison? Therefore, society is sexist against men. What would I be missing if I held that worldview?
Wow. Well, the different social dynamics of men and women, how um, men and women are socialized differently. To be a man is to be a little more aggressive, right? So that aggressiveness can go overboard, especially when you're trying to prove your manhood, right? And it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, I guess. If well, not self-fulfilling prophecy, that's not what I want to say, but it leads to more incidents where you need to be aggressive, right? So to the point where you don't even question it anymore. To be a guy is to be aggressive. So hey, I need money, you know what, I'm gonna go take it. I can do that. I'm a dude, I'm supposed to. And that's very simplistic, but I think it's something along those lines. People are socialized differently. The biological differences, I can't really speak to. I mean, I have my assumptions and things like that, given the neurochemical differences, between men and women. But I am not a scientist by any means, so I'm not going to talk about that. But I can talk about how men and women, boys and girls, are socialized differently and how that may come into play as well.
So you talk about monocausal explanations of racial gaps don't hold up to scrutiny, and we should disabuse ourselves of the mistaken notion that they do. So Indian Americans and white Americans have very different incomes. The Indian Americans are like almost 45% higher.
Mhm.
What are different possible explanations than America's racist against whites and pro-Indian?
I don't know. Maybe. Well, I don't really know the answer to that question. I do know that even West African and Jamaican immigrants are doing quite well, right? So, what excuse does the African American have, right? Doesn't that prove that racism isn't a thing? I think those cultures are coming with their own values, attitudes, and beliefs, and those values, attitudes, and beliefs affect how well they do in education and then in their professional lives. It's more conducive to that kind of success, perhaps. Now, because of the West African and Jamaican, right, Caribbean success in America, a lot of African Americans have resorted to calling themselves ADOS, African descendants of slaves. And that's a different dynamic. So we have a different history, and our history has stifled us, but your history hasn't. That's also not true. West Africa was by no means a haven, during the colonial period, as the Caribbean, the same way. There was slavery in the Caribbean, right? So that's not an excuse either. I think what the excuse is well, a outlook on life, right? That says, okay, if I work hard, if I do this, that, and the other thing, I will succeed. As opposed to, if I work hard, I won't succeed because the world's against me, right? If I can simplify the differences as much as possible, that's it. Just a positive outlook versus a not so positive outlook. It may just be that simple.
I think that's really important because if my worldview is, well, Congress needs to get their act together or else I'm screwed. Well, yeah, Congress does need to get their act together. But also, if I just sit back and take that, I'm not working to increase the amount of skills and on the
Right.
job experience that I have to increase my knowledge, to increase my capital, to give
Right.
myself a brighter future. So if all I'm doing is sitting back and saying, well, unfortunately, Richard Spencer still isn't banned on Twitter. So, I mean, there's not really any progress we can make. Uh, it's so vitally important that narrative, I think, stop being promoted. Do you have anything else on that before we go to the next issue?
No, I think I'm
I asked
okay.
I asked a social justice activist. I said, "Look, I'm having this guy from Free Black Thought on. Send me a video that I should watch to really get an idea or a small introduction into your social justice worldview." So they sent me this 1 minute and 25-second video. Let's watch it. I'd like you to comment, please.
Okay.
There's a question I often ask when I'm in front of a mixed race group. And I ask the Black people in the room a kind of rhetorical question. How often have you attempted to give a white person feedback on their inevitable and often unaware racist assumptions or behaviors and had that go well for you? Never. Number two response, rarely. And I'll never forget asking a group, okay, so what if you could just give us feedback on our inevitable and often unaware racist assumptions and behaviors? And I'll never forget this Black man raising his hand and saying, it would be revolutionary. And just take that in. I just want all the white people to just take that in. Revolutionary, that we would receive the feedback with grace, reflect, and seek to change our behavior. That's how difficult we are.
Wow.
That's how big a-holes we are.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, that's not a very tall order. Really? That's a revolution? But we can't get there from the current paradigm that says only mean people who want to hurt others based on race ever could do so. So we just have to change what we understand it means to perpetrate racism.
Anything you want on that clip? Where do we start?
Where do we start? Well, I mean, it's true that, people don't like talking about race. When I heard of Robin DiAngelo originally and the term white fragility, I thought I knew what she was talking about. There are people who, white people who are, they don't want to touch that, right? They're going to back away from that and they don't want to deal with it, and when you point out something they did that may have been unsavory or, well, racist to a degree, they can't deal with that either. There are people out there like that. What the issue I have with DiAngelo is the issue I had with her embrace of critical social justice, which basically says, no, it literally says, the question isn't did racism occur, is how did it occur in that situation? And if anything that makes white people comfortable is suspect. And lines like that make it so that something is always already racist, right? So it's one thing to talk to somebody and have them react in a certain way and say, okay, that's what you're doing that. It's another thing to say, white people do that, right? It's essentialism, right? It's just negative essentialism. So that's the issue I have with that mostly. I get what she's saying to a degree, but then when you read the rest of her stuff and put it in context, it's not so great.
So when it comes to difficulties discussing race, I think Erec, the Attorney General, the Fast and Furious guy, classically said, well, whites are frankly cowards when it comes to race. Is there anything that we're not getting that's going on behind closed doors that we're just not aware of, that we've actively not been willing to discuss? Is there anything that you guys want to say? I don't know how else to say that, but
well, I mean, there's an inherent essentialism in that question.
Exactly.
Yeah. We're not the Borg, is what I'm trying.
Exactly.
We don't. I don't know what other people are thinking because they share my skin tone. But when that person said that white people are basically cowards when it comes to race. I mean, sometimes that's true, but other times they're just like, I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm definitely going to say the wrong thing, and it's not going to be taken well. Well, it might be taken well. There might be somebody who wants to have a good faith conversation about things when you do say something, quote unquote, wrong. There are other people out there who, believe basically that words are violence, intentions don't matter, and therefore everything is potentially wrong. Those people are out there, right? And they seem to be gaining more ground with every passing day. So there's a difference between cowardice and apprehension. There's a difference between, being afraid of doing something and being cautious, So I think we need to make those distinctions. But yeah, sure, there are people who are, cowards when it comes to this subject, sure. But there are other people who want to do something but just don't know how.
And I didn't mean to be an essentialist in the question. If you didn't have a website called Free Black Thought, it never would have crossed my mind to ask you that.
Yeah.
Eric Holder is the Attorney General's name. Got caught sending guns to the Mexican drug cartel in Operation Fast and Furious. Nice guy. Okay, well, one more thing on two more things on this issue. What is your thesis in the book, A Critique of Anti-Racism in Rhetoric and Composition?
My thesis is that, and this is before I really dug into critical social justice and critical race theory and things like that. I was aware of critical race theory, but I didn't want to touch that explicitly because I thought, I could do this in a broader way, right? And my thesis was basically that the anti-racists in my field anyway are too dedicated to what's called pre-figurative politics. Pre-figurative politics is when you try to create the world you want to see and you kind of live that. Occupy Wall Street was pre-figurative politics. The camp, they weren't just camping out. They were having meetings, they had free libraries and things like that. That was the world they wanted to see. Well, it's possible to get so into that world that you create a bubble, right? and you're not concerned with the outside world anymore, or you don't see the outside world. The whole reality is your little bubble of critical social justice, right? And you're not seeing anything else, and you want to stay there. And if you do acknowledge the outside world, you're trying to push that what's inside that bubble onto it too coercively, right? So that's my biggest complaint. The biggest part of my thesis is that people are playing make-believe when they should be addressing reality. And if they address reality, they'll see, that not everything is about race. They'll see that somebody asking a question just because they're white, doesn't mean that's a personal attack on you. It's a question, right? It's not inherently racist to teach students of color standard English, right? And the reason why they think it is because in their bubble isn't American society, right? American society is a place where standard English can come in handy, right? It's not a sign that you've been oppressed. It's a sign that you have a pragmatic sensibility, and this dialect may come in handy one day. There's a professor in my field who went as far as to say, Black students who want to learn standard English and don't want to just speak in Black English are being selfish and immature, because what they're doing is learning a skill that would help them succeed in this world he doesn't like, right? The people inside the bubble don't like that world. So if you leave the bubble when you're successful, you're maintaining the status quo. That's a bad thing, So that's basically the gist of the book.
One of the recent presidential candidates that but had a lot of sympathy on both sides of the aisle was Marianne Williamson. I'm only going to play a small portion of this video, but talk to me about the mindset and the mentality of someone who would do something like this and what you would want to say to Miss Williamson.
On behalf of myself and on behalf of my country, to you and all African Americans, from the beginning of our nation's history, in honor of your ancestors and on behalf of your children, please hear this from my heart.
Okay, she goes on to ask all the whites in the audience to say a prayer apologizing to all the blacks in the audience. What would you say, if anything, to such a mindset?
Okay, I need to ask some questions here. So she was telling the white people to repeat after her to Black people.
Yes,
right?
And in the video you can see they are asked to put their hands on the blacks in the audience.
I would hightail it out of there.
Yeah.
Yes, I would hightail it the F out of there. I'm not going to be a part of your cult here, okay? I'm not going to be the catalyst for one of your rituals or anything like that. What's more, like, I don't need your apology. What I need is for you to get out of my way, right? The issue in the 60s with the civil rights movement wasn't, that classical liberal values, were bad. It's that we weren't allowed to participate in those, right? So the country wasn't living up to those values. That was the problem, not the values.
Yeah.
So as long as we're allowed, as long as that door to classical liberal values isn't closed, I'm good. Just don't apologize to me. Just don't be racist and get out of my way, right? Let me have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness like everybody else. That's what I want. I don't need a mass apology, right? That's weird.
It's so difficult for me to talk to the mindset of someone who judges people explicitly by the color of their skin. I mean, a lot of us sort of walk around on people like me on the right, I'm always a little on eggshells. I care so much about the economic freedom aspect that I don't want to be called sexist, xenophobic, or
Yeah.
racist. So, but then people like this explicitly judge all people based on the color of their skin. Why do you think it is that the self-described anti-racists are so explicitly racist?
Well, that's a big one, man. A lot of people, and I'm speaking from experience and things like that. They're fine with black people as long as those black people are, you know, beneath them in some way. So okay, you're black, you have all these, negative aspects, no fault of yours, but you have them, and you need me to kind of save you or things like that. Where the essentialism is parent-child, right?
Mm.
So there's that aspect too, and I know people like that, and I know people who have had a problem with me being, their intellectual equal or more so, right? And I guarantee you, well, I know for a fact some, but I guarantee you many of them probably have Black Lives Matter signs in their lawn, right?
Hmm.
So, and they're uncomfortable with black people who are on par with them. So there's that. Secondly, some people they just drank the Kool-Aid. They've been told by, mainstream media, through images, through talk, all kinds of things, what it means to be a black person, what a black person looks like and acts like and sounds like and things like that. So they've been conditioned to essentialize, and that's there too. The fact that 80% of Black Americans are lower middle class or higher, right? That you wouldn't think that, because we're defined as that 20%, that isn't there, right? The 20% that's struggling. We're all that now, right? So I don't know. It's very frustrating that that happens, but a lot of people they're either uncomfortable with Black equality, right? Or they just don't know any better.
What do you think is the most important contribution of the work of Glenn Lowry?
The most important contribution.
Yeah,
There are a lot.
or
Uh,
give us a few.
well, he's honest. He's a black man who's honest about what's going on, right? There's a narrative that he refuses to follow. He's going to follow the stats. He's going to follow the science, right? He's going to follow the research, and that's that. He's a fair-minded critical thinker, right? In that it doesn't, if the stats say something that he doesn't like, too bad, right? If the stats say something that is negative, that is sad and depressing about Black people, too bad. You have to be reality-based. You have to look at, you can't change reality if you refuse to acknowledge reality, right? So he acknowledges reality, and he says what needs to be said, and he's not afraid to say it. And his contribution is not just that, but modeling what it looks like to not be afraid to say that, to be called all kinds of names by white people and Black people, and to keep going. So those are his contributions.
I once spoke to a gentleman who I went to Hebrew school with, and I asked him, we were always told to watch out for all this anti-Semitism in this terrible country called America, and we're in our mid-20s now, and we don't have a single significant anti-Semitic incident that we can actually report. Not that it doesn't exist, but we were told it's everywhere, and we haven't experienced it. And he goes, yeah, Zionism thrives off of Jewish insecurity. So in other words, he's saying that there are leaders within this movement that benefit at the expense of the group they claim to represent by keeping them insecure. And
Sure.
that is the actual goal. Candace Owens says she sees this with BLM. A lot of other organizations do this. Is this something you see that is one of the biggest issues, that there's actually an economic incentive to increase the amount of insecurity?
Oh, definitely. I mean, this is an industry now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an industry, and if you make your money on Black insecurity, you need to maintain Black insecurity. Kendi wants a department, like a branch of government, based on anti-racism. That strongly implies that he wants, that's not an ad hoc thing, right? That's a kind of a permanent thing. So he basically, he seems to be saying that racism will never go away, or that he doesn't want it to go away, or whatever. You have places like UPenn, if I'm not mistaken, giving MBAs in diversity, equity, and inclusion, right, and anti-racism and things like that. Now, in order for that degree to make sense, to be lucrative, you got to have racism, or discrimination, So if that goes away, that person doesn't have a job. So I mean, but we have all kinds of different takes on that. Woke Inc., I think, is one. Just the anti-racism as an industry. I'm trying to think of all the terms I've heard to describe this. But I guess the point is there are various terms because, people are starting to open their eyes to this, right? There is money to be made. I know people, the last thing they want is for racism to go away, right? That's their bread and butter. There are people in my field like that. The last thing they want is for racism to go away. And when they feel like there hasn't been a racist incident, they're going to pretend there was one. I've seen this with my own eyes, So yeah, I don't know what I was talking about originally, but
there is a lot of material on freeblackthought.com. If someone wants to start, they want to get an introduction to what happens here. Where can they go? Is there something specific you recommend reading?
I would, not specific, but I would go to the journal. I would go to the journal, look at all the titles, the topics, right? Take a look at those to really see what we're about. The compendium, there it is. Yes. The journal, and this is that article right there. How would Black America fare if progressives got their way? That's, hey, read that, man. Read that.
That is next on my list. All right. Final bonus question. What is your favorite sentence in the Voluntarist Handbook?
My favorite sentence in the Voluntarist Handbook is in the introduction. And it says, should I achieve my ends in life violently with threats or voluntarily with persuasion? So I like that question because, well, it implies how important rhetoric is, right? Rhetoric and the ability to use your words staves off physical violence, right? Daryl Davis said it the best. If we're talking, we're not fighting, right? So if I can use my words to deal with the situation instead of physical coercion or something like that, then we're moving in the right direction.
The website is freeblackthought.com. I'll have links to that along with the journal in the description below. Thanks to everyone for watching Keith Knight Don't Tread on Anyone in the Libertarian Institute. Dr. Smith, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.